The Pentagon's emergency briefing room fell silent as intelligence analyst Rebecca Chen slammed the declassified document folder onto the mahogany table. The failed cattle ranch that single mother bought for $3,000 at foreclosure auction. She's unknowingly sitting on the most sensitive Cold War intelligence cache in American history. General Morrison's weathered face went ashen as Chen continued reading from the report. And Sarah Williams, the waitress who purchased it to give her daughter a fresh start, has just discovered documents that could rewrite everything we thought we knew about Soviet operations on American soil. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The scorching Nevada sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked earth of Sage Valley, where tumbleweeds rolled across abandoned cattle pastures and broken dreams lay scattered like the rusted farm equipment dotting the landscape. For most residents of this forgotten corner of America, another ranch foreclosure meant another nail in the coffin of a dying way of life. But for Sarah Williams, this desolate stretch of land represented something entirely different: hope. Sarah adjusted her worn baseball cap as she studied the property listing spread across the hood of her 15-year-old Honda Civic. At 32, she carried herself with the quiet resilience of someone who had weathered storms that would have broken others. Her calloused hands told the story of someone who had worked double shifts at Murphy's Diner for the past 6 years, saving every spare dollar while raising her 8-year-old daughter Emma alone. The faded jeans and practical boots spoke of a woman who chose function over fashion, not from lack of taste, but from financial necessity that left no room for luxury. "You absolutely sure about this, Sarah?" asked Tom Hendricks, the gruff county clerk whose keys jangled as he approached the rusted gate of the defunct Clearwater Ranch. His expression mixed genuine concern with barely concealed skepticism. "Bank's been trying to unload this place for 3 years. Nothing here but coyotes and bad luck." Sarah's response carried the calm determination that had become her trademark among the close-knit community of Sage Valley. $3,000 for 400 acres is a steal, Tom. Even if the land's not perfect for cattle, Emma and I can make something work here. She gestured toward the sprawling property that stretched to the horizon. City living isn't an option anymore with rent prices, and she deserves space to grow up. Tom shrugged with the practiced indifference of someone who had witnessed countless dreams crash against harsh reality. "Your money, your choice. Though what a single mother who's never ranched a day in her life once with this godforsaken place is beyond my understanding." He unlocked the heavy chain that had secured the property since its previous owner had walked away 18 months earlier, unable to meet mortgage payments after a devastating drought killed most of his cattle. As the gate swung open with a protesting screech of rusted hinges, Sarah climbed back into her car and drove onto the property that represented her family's last chance at financial independence. 400 acres of seemingly worthless scrubland that had been seized for unpaid taxes after its previous owner had abandoned it, following a series of catastrophic losses. The main ranch house stood like a sun-bleached monument to failed dreams on the distant horizon, its broken windows reflecting the afternoon light like vacant eyes staring across the desolate landscape. Sarah parked near the dilapidated structure and surveyed her new acquisition with eyes that saw potential where others perceived only problems. The purchase had raised eyebrows throughout Sage Valley, where she was known as a hard-working single mother who had transformed her life from high school dropout to reliable breadwinner through sheer determination and relentless work ethic. Why would such a practical woman risk her life savings on property that had defeated experienced ranchers? The answer lay not in ranching expertise she didn't possess, but in stories her grandfather had shared during her childhood visits to his small farm outside Carson City. Stories about this very region and the secrets it had once harbored during America's most dangerous decade. As she approached the abandoned ranch house, memories flooded back of summer evenings, spent listening to her grandfather's tales of his work as a civilian contractor during the 1960s. Government had facilities all through these valleys, Robert Martinez had told young Sarah as they sat on his porch, watching desert sunsets paint the mountains purple. Places that officially never existed, projects that history books will never mention. "What kind of projects, Grandpa?" Sarah had asked with the endless curiosity of a 10-year-old fascinated by family mysteries. Her grandfather's expression had grown serious in the way it always did when discussing his classified work. "The kind that kept America safe during times when safety couldn't be guaranteed, Mija. Underground installations, communication networks, research facilities hidden in plain sight throughout Nevada's empty spaces." Those childhood conversations had planted seeds in Sarah's imagination that grew stronger over the years. When she had seen the Clearwater Ranch listed in the county foreclosure auction, something about the location had triggered half-remembered fragments of her grandfather's stories. The geographical markers, the proximity to certain landmarks he had mentioned, the way the property seemed to exist in administrative blind spots that made it easy to overlook. Now, as she pushed open the creaking door of the main house, dust motes dancing in shafts of sunlight that penetrated gaps in the damaged roof, Sarah felt an inexplicable connection to mysteries that might lie hidden beneath this seemingly ordinary ranch. The interior was a chaotic museum of abandonment, broken furniture, scattered papers, and the ghostly outlines on walls where family photographs had once hung, marking the dreams that had died here. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In what had been the kitchen, a calendar from 2019 still clung to the wall, its pages turned to March, the approximate time when the previous owner had finally accepted defeat and walked away from everything he had built. Sarah moved methodically through the house, mentally cataloguing structural damage and assessing what could be salvaged versus what would require complete replacement. Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter's after-school program coordinator, reminding her that Emma's pickup time was approaching. "How's the disaster property?" asked Maria Santos, Sarah's closest friend and fellow waitress at Murphy's Diner, when Sarah called for a quick update. Maria had been the most vocal critic of Sarah's decision to purchase the ranch, her practical nature recoiling at what seemed like an emotional gamble with resources her friend couldn't afford to lose. "Less disastrous than expected," Sarah replied, stepping onto the back porch to escape the stifling interior heat. "The main structure needs significant work, but the foundation is solid. Most of the outbuildings are still standing, and the land itself just needs attention." "And your long-term plan?" Maria pressed, knowing that no amount of optimism could overcome the fundamental challenge of making barren land profitable without substantial capital investment. Sarah's gaze swept across the vast landscape that now belonged to her and Emma. "We'll start small. Maybe some goats or chickens while I learn the basics. The important thing is giving Emma space and stability." She paused, unwilling to share her deeper suspicions about the property's potential secrets. "I have a feeling this place has more to offer than what's visible on the surface." After ending the call, Sarah retrieved basic surveying equipment from her car, tools she had purchased second-hand after researching property assessment techniques online. While her friends saw her simply as a determined single mother making a desperate gamble, her associate degree in criminal justice and 2 years working for the county assessor's office had given her skills beyond typical waitressing. Her interest in the Clearwater Ranch wasn't purely emotional. She had studied historical land surveys and government facility maps extensively before placing her bid. The afternoon sun tracked across the cloudless sky as Sarah systematically explored the ranch's infrastructure, checking wells, examining fence lines, and documenting the property's current condition. The first two water sources showed typical signs of neglect and drought damage, requiring substantial investment to restore functionality. But the third well, located in a depression behind a cluster of Joshua trees, presented something unexpected. The mechanical pump was seized with years of disuse, but Sarah's testing equipment detected consistent water flow at depths that suggested the aquifer remained viable. More intriguing was the surrounding area's subtle but unusual characteristics. Survey markers that didn't appear on current county maps, concrete foundations that seemed too substantial for typical ranch outbuildings, and soil composition that suggested significant excavation had occurred decades earlier. As she collected soil samples from around the mysterious concrete structures, Sarah noticed metallic fragments mixed with the dirt that didn't match typical ranch equipment. She carefully bagged several specimens, labeling each with precise location coordinates for potential future analysis. Her grandfather's stories about hidden government installations suddenly seemed less like family folklore and more like historical reality. Around 4:30, the distant rumble of an approaching vehicle interrupted Sarah's investigation. Shielding her eyes against the afternoon glare, she spotted a black government sedan navigating the rough dirt road with obvious difficulty. The vehicle's official plates and reinforced construction seemed absurdly out of place in these rural surroundings, like a presidential limousine at a county fair. The sedan stopped beside her Honda, and a man in his 40s emerged, wearing the kind of generic business suit that screamed federal employment. He approached with practiced confidence, despite the incongruity of dress shoes on rough terrain, extending an identification wallet as he reached her. "Ms. Williams, I'm Agent David Foster with the Department of Defense Property Management Division," he announced, his handshake firm but brief. "I understand you recently acquired this property through county foreclosure proceedings." Sarah accepted his credentials with measured caution, noting the authenticity of his federal identification while wondering how news of her purchase had reached Pentagon-level attention within hours. "That's correct. Is there some issue with the property transfer?" Agent Foster's professional smile carried an undertone of urgency that didn't match his casual tone. "Not exactly an issue, but there are certain administrative complications regarding this particular parcel, historical designations that weren't properly noted in the foreclosure documentation." "What kind of historical designations?" Sarah asked, her tone remaining neutral despite the sudden alertness she felt. Something about the agent's carefully chosen words suggested layers of meaning beyond surface explanations. "May I be direct, Ms. Williams?" Foster continued without waiting for permission. "During the 1960s, this property was utilized for certain defense-related activities that created ongoing security classifications. While those operations concluded decades ago, federal regulations require specialized procedures for civilian ownership of formerly classified locations." Sarah absorbed this information with outward calm that masked her racing thoughts. Her grandfather's stories about secret government facilities suddenly gained credibility from an unexpected source. "Are you saying my property purchase is invalid?" "Not invalid," Foster clarified, "but complicated. The Department of Defense is prepared to offer you immediate compensation well above your investment cost, say $15,000, to facilitate transfer to appropriate federal oversight." The offer represented 5 times Sarah's purchase price for property she had owned for less than 8 hours, confirming her suspicion that something significant lay hidden beneath the ranch's ordinary appearance. "That's generous," she replied carefully, "but I bought this place with specific plans in mind. I'm not interested in flipping it for quick profit." Foster's professional demeanor slipped slightly, revealing momentary frustration before he recovered. Perhaps you should consider the complications that civilian ownership of formally classified properties can create. Federal oversight exists for legitimate security reasons that extend beyond financial considerations. What specific security concerns exist on land that's been abandoned for years? Sarah pressed, sensing that direct questions might reveal more than diplomatic conversation. The agent's hesitation spoke volumes about information he couldn't or wouldn't share. Historical environmental assessments, potential unexploded ordnance, specialized cleanup requirements, the kind of issues that could create significant liability for private owners lacking appropriate resources. "I appreciate the warning," Sarah replied with finality that made her position clear. "But I've done my research on environmental hazards, and I'm willing to accept reasonable risks. If federal oversight becomes necessary, I assume you have procedures for working with private landowners." Foster handed her his business card with practiced professionalism that couldn't entirely mask his disappointment. "Please consider carefully. Ms. Williams, these complications have a way of escalating beyond what civilian property owners anticipate." As the black sedan disappeared down the dirt road, kicking up dust clouds that glowed orange in the setting sun, Sarah's mind raced through implications of this unexpected federal interest. Why would the Department of Defense send a representative within hours of her property purchase? The proposed buyout amount and the agent's barely concealed urgency suggested the government's interest extended far beyond routine administrative procedures. Sarah returned to the concrete foundations she'd been examining, studying them with new understanding of their potential significance. The unusual construction patterns, the strategic positioning relative to geographical landmarks, and the sophisticated survey markers suddenly formed a coherent picture of installations designed for purposes far beyond typical ranch operations. Rather than return to town that evening, Sarah decided to establish a temporary camp on the property. She unrolled a sleeping bag in the back of her Honda, the ranch house being too damaged for safe shelter, and lay beneath the vast canopy of stars visible only in areas far from urban light pollution. As coyotes howled in the distance and desert wind whispered through the Joshua trees, Sarah contemplated the day's revelations and the growing certainty that her impulsive property purchase had stumbled onto something far more significant than anyone could have imagined. Dawn broke with the crystalline clarity unique to high desert mornings, revealing landscape details that darkness had obscured. Sarah rose with the sun and conducted a more systematic survey of the property's unusual features, documenting everything. With her phone's camera, while the light remained optimal for photography, her first priority was Emma's school pickup at 3 o'clock, but the morning hours provided opportunity to gather more evidence about the ranch's mysterious past. Her systematic exploration revealed additional concrete structures, partially buried by decades of wind-blown sand and debris. Some appeared to be ventilation systems, others resembled communication equipment foundations, and several showed characteristics consistent with underground facility access points. Each discovery reinforced her growing conviction that the Clearwater Ranch had served purposes far beyond cattle operations during its government-connected years. Sarah's phone rang as she documented what appeared to be a camouflaged entrance to an underground structure. Emma's voice bubbled with excitement about their new adventure, as Sarah described the property in terms an 8-year-old could appreciate, emphasizing space for pets and gardens, while carefully omitting references to mysterious government installations and federal agents. "When can I see our ranch, Mom?" Emma asked with the boundless enthusiasm that made every sacrifice worthwhile. "This weekend," Sarah promised. "But first, I need to make sure everything is safe and ready for exploration." The conversation reminded Sarah that her decisions affected more than her own future. Whatever secrets lay hidden beneath the ranch, her primary responsibility remained providing stability and security for her daughter. The federal agent's warnings about complications and liability suddenly carried personal weight beyond abstract concerns about government overreach. After ending the call, Sarah drove into Sage Valley to research property records and historical documents that might clarify the ranch's government connections. The county clerk's office maintained archives dating back to the 1950s, and her criminal justice background had taught her how to navigate bureaucratic information systems that often contained more than their custodians realized. Tom Hendricks greeted her arrival with knowing humor. "Buyer's remorse already setting in. I warned you that place was nothing but trouble." "Actually, I'm researching the property's history," Sarah replied, "trying to understand what previous owners used the land for during the 1960s and 1970s. Tom's expression grew thoughtful as he led her to the archive section. "Now that you mention it, there were some unusual ownership transfers during those decades. Government leases, defense, contractor agreements, that sort of thing. Most of the documentation is probably classified, but the basic property transfers should be public record." The files Tom retrieved revealed a complex ownership history that confirmed Sarah's suspicions about the ranch's government connections. Between 1962 and 1978, the property had been leased to something called Desert Research Associates, a company that existed only on paper and had no business address beyond a Washington, D.C. post office box. The lease agreements referenced specialized testing facilities and underground research installations without providing specific details about their purpose or scope. Most intriguingly, the files contained correspondence between county officials and federal representatives discussing security protocols and classified waste disposal procedures that suggested the ranch had housed operations far more sensitive than typical military exercises. Several documents bore partial classification markings that had been redacted before release to county custody, leaving tantalizing fragments of information about projects codenamed Operation Deep Freeze and Project Mountain Echo. Sarah photographed relevant documents with her phone, building a file of evidence that painted an increasingly clear picture of the ranch's role in Cold War defense initiatives. The paper trail suggested installations that had operated continuously for over 15 years before being hastily abandoned and sealed in the late 1970s, coinciding with shifts in defense spending and strategic priorities. As she left the county offices with copies of the available records, Sarah's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Agent Foster's voice carried increased urgency compared to their previous conversation. "Ms. Williams, I hope you've had time to reconsider our offer regarding the property transfer. Certain new information has come to light that makes federal oversight even more critical." "What kind of new information?" Sarah asked, suspecting that her research activities had triggered additional government attention. "The kind that creates liability issues beyond what private citizens should handle," Foster replied, with carefully neutral phrasing. "I'm authorized to increase our compensation offer to $25,000 for immediate transfer, contingent on your agreement to sign standard non-disclosure agreements. The escalation from $15,000 to $25,000 in less than 24 hours confirmed Sarah's growing understanding of the property's true significance. "I appreciate the improved offer, but I still need time to fully assess what I've purchased before making any decisions." Foster's response carried an edge of frustration that professional training couldn't entirely suppress. "Ms. Williams, I strongly advise against independent exploration of the property. Historical government installations can contain hazards that require specialized handling protocols." "Are you forbidding me from accessing my own legally purchased property?" Sarah asked, testing the boundaries of the government's authority. "Not forbidding," Foster clarified, "but strongly recommending caution. Federal regulations exist to protect both national security interests and civilian safety." After ending the call, Sarah drove back to the ranch with increased determination to understand exactly what she had stumbled onto. The government's escalating offers and increasingly direct warnings suggested discoveries that could reshape her understanding of Cold War history and potentially provide her family with financial security beyond anything she had imagined possible from her $3,000 investment. The afternoon sun was approaching its peak intensity as Sarah returned to the mysterious concrete structures that had captured her attention during the morning survey. Armed with basic excavation tools purchased from the hardware store, she began, carefully clearing sand and debris from what appeared to be an access hatch partially buried beneath decades of accumulated material. After 2 hours of cautious digging, Sarah uncovered a heavy metal door marked with radiation warning symbols and text that made her blood run cold. "Authorized personnel only. Security clearance required. Deadly force authorized." Below these warnings, additional text indicated the installation's official designation: Facility Echo 7, Operation Deep Freeze, Department of Defense. The discovery confirmed her grandfather's stories while raising questions about what exactly lay hidden beneath her property. The elaborate security measures and ominous warnings suggested installations far more sensitive than typical Cold War communication facilities or storage bunkers. Sarah photographed the door and its markings extensively before attempting to determine whether the underground facility remained accessible. The heavy metal barrier showed signs of deliberate sealing, with welding marks around the edges that appeared designed to prevent unauthorized entry. However, decades of weathering had created small gaps that suggested the seal might not be completely intact. As she examined the access point more closely, Sarah noticed ventilation systems that indicated the underground installation might extend far beyond what surface features suggested. The positioning relative to other concrete structures implied a network of connected facilities that could span significant portions of her property. Her investigation was interrupted by the approach of another vehicle, this time a white government SUV with additional federal agents. As 3 men in identical suits emerged from the vehicle, Sarah realized that her morning research activities and afternoon excavation had triggered a much larger government response than Agent Foster's previous solo visit. The lead agent introduced himself as Supervisor James Mitchell from something called the Defense Security Service, a designation that sounded more serious than Foster's Property Management Division. His approach carried an authority that suggested Sarah's situation had escalated beyond routine administrative procedures. "Ms. Williams, I understand you've been conducting unauthorized excavation activities on property containing classified federal installations. This creates serious security violations that require immediate federal intervention." Sarah faced the 3 agents with calm determination, knowing that her response would shape whatever confrontation was developing. "I've been exploring my legally purchased property. If federal installations exist here, that information should have been disclosed before the foreclosure auction." Mitchell's expression revealed calculated assessment as he studied the woman, who had unknowingly triggered a national security situation. "Federal disclosure requirements don't apply to installations that officially never existed. Your purchase was legitimate, but accessing classified facilities requires security clearances you don't possess." "Then perhaps we should discuss how to resolve this situation in a way that respects both national security and private property rights," Sarah replied, recognizing that cooperation might serve her interests better than confrontation. The negotiation that followed would determine not only Sarah's immediate future, but potentially the fate of secrets that had remained buried for decades beneath the Nevada desert, waiting for a determined single mother to uncover truth that powerful forces had worked tirelessly to keep hidden from the American people. The tense standoff on the Nevada desert lasted nearly 3 hours as Sarah Williams faced down 3 federal agents who had arrived to contain what they termed a potential security breach. Supervisor Mitchell's initial demands for immediate evacuation and property surrender met unexpected resistance from a single mother who had done her homework and understood more about her rights than the government had anticipated. "Let me be absolutely clear about the legal situation here," Sarah stated, pulling out the property deed and documentation she had gathered from the county clerk's office. "I purchased this land through a legitimate foreclosure auction after proper public notice. If classified installations exist on my property, the federal government had multiple opportunities to intervene before the sale was finalized." Mitchell's expression revealed grudging respect for Sarah's preparation, though his tone remained authoritative. "Ms. Williams, regardless of the legal technicalities surrounding your purchase, accessing classified installations without proper clearance violates multiple federal statutes. We're offering you an opportunity to resolve this cooperatively." Sarah's response demonstrated the careful research she had conducted during her morning visit to the county archives. "According to the documents I reviewed today, the federal lease on this property expired in 1978. There's no record of lease renewal, property purchase, or easement agreements that would give the government ongoing rights to installations that were apparently abandoned decades ago." The revelation that Sarah had been researching government documents clearly caught the agents off guard. Agent Foster, who had arrived with the additional personnel, exchanged meaningful glances with Mitchell that suggested their strategy required immediate recalibration. "What exactly did you find in those county records?" Mitchell asked, his careful phrasing revealing both curiosity and concern about what information had been inadvertently preserved in public archives. Sarah had anticipated this question and prepared her response to demonstrate knowledge while maintaining some strategic ambiguity. Enough to understand that Desert Research Associates operated sophisticated installations here for 16 years under federal contract. Enough to know that Operation Deep Freeze and Project Mountain Echo involved activities significant enough to require underground facilities with serious security measures. The specific project names clearly impacted the federal agents in ways Sarah hadn't fully expected. Mitchell's professional composure cracked momentarily, revealing the kind of alarm typically reserved for major intelligence breaches. He stepped away from the group to make urgent phone calls, while Foster attempted to continue negotiations with increasingly obvious desperation. "Ms. Williams, I think you're underestimating the complexity of this situation," Foster began, his tone shifting toward something approaching pleading. "The projects you mentioned involved national security assets that remain classified at the highest levels. Even inadvertent exposure creates complications that extend far beyond property disputes." Sarah sensed the power dynamic shifting in her favor as the agent's confidence evaporated under the weight of her unexpected knowledge. If these installations are so sensitive, why were they abandoned without proper decommissioning? Why was the property allowed to enter foreclosure proceedings without federal intervention? The questions highlighted fundamental flaws in whatever containment strategy the government had relied upon for decades. Foster's inability to provide satisfactory answers revealed that Sarah had stumbled onto administrative failures that created liability far beyond routine security breaches. Mitchell returned from his phone calls with visibly increased tension, his subsequent conversation with Sarah carrying authority that suggested direct communication with high-level Pentagon officials. "I've been instructed to inform you that this situation now involves national security interests that require immediate federal oversight. We're prepared to offer significant compensation for your cooperation." "How significant?" Sarah asked, recognizing that each escalation in government desperation provided additional leverage for her family's future. $50,000 for immediate property transfer and agreement to standard non-disclosure protocols, Mitchell replied, the amount representing more than 3 years of Sarah's current income from the diner. Sarah's response revealed the careful thought she had given to her position during the morning's research. "That's generous, but I need to understand what I'm agreeing to before making any commitments. What specific security concerns justify such urgent federal intervention?" Mitchell's hesitation spoke volumes about information he couldn't share, even under these circumstances. "The installations beneath your property contained research materials and operational records that could compromise ongoing defense initiatives if disclosed improperly." "And these materials are still down there?" Sarah pressed, sensing that each question revealed additional layers of the situation's complexity. "We have reason to believe significant documentation remains in the sealed facilities," Mitchell admitted, his acknowledgement confirming Sarah's suspicion that the underground installations contained more than abandoned equipment. The admission transformed Sarah's understanding of her situation from property dispute to potential historical discovery, with implications extending far beyond personal financial considerations. If classified Cold War documents remained accessible beneath her ranch, their historical and political value could dwarf any government buyout offer. "I need time to consider your offer," Sarah replied, knowing that rushed decisions rarely serve the person under pressure. "This involves more than just money. It's about my daughter's future and my responsibility as a citizen who might have access to historically significant information." Mitchell's frustration became evident as Sarah's cooperation proved more elusive than anticipated. "Ms. Williams, I must stress that unauthorized access to classified materials carries severe criminal penalties. We're offering cooperation rather than enforcement, but our patience has limits." Sarah's background in criminal justice had prepared her to recognize threats disguised as warnings. "Are you saying I'm under investigation for legally purchasing property and conducting normal owner activities?" "I'm saying that circumstances can change rapidly when national security interests are involved," Mitchell replied, with careful ambiguity that avoided direct threats while implying consequences. For non-cooperation, the veiled intimidation attempt revealed the government's uncertainty about how to handle Sarah's unexpected resistance. Unlike typical civilian encounters with federal authority, Sarah had done enough research to understand her rights, while demonstrating enough knowledge to complicate standard containment procedures. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, the standoff reached an impasse that served neither side's immediate interests. The federal agents couldn't force cooperation without legal justification they didn't possess, while Sarah couldn't safely ignore the government's concerns without understanding the full scope of what lay buried beneath her property. "I propose a compromise," Sarah offered, recognizing that some form of cooperation might serve everyone's interests better than continued confrontation. "I'll agree to suspend any further excavation activities while you prepare a formal proposal that addresses both national security concerns and my rights as the legal property owner." Mitchell's relief at this suggestion revealed how concerned the government had become about Sarah's potential to create uncontrollable complications. "That seems reasonable. How much time do you need to consider our offer?" 1 week, Sarah replied, knowing that additional time would allow her to research options and seek legal advice about her unprecedented situation. During that period, I'll maintain the property's security and avoid any activities that could compromise sensitive materials. The agreement satisfied the federal agent's immediate need to prevent further unauthorized access, while giving Sarah time to understand the full implications of her discovery. However, what none of them anticipated was how quickly circumstances would evolve beyond their carefully negotiated temporary truce. After the government vehicles departed, Sarah remained on the property to process the day's revelations and plan her next steps. The confirmation that classified documents remained accessible beneath her ranch created opportunities and responsibilities that extended far beyond her original hopes for financial independence. She had inadvertently acquired possession of historical materials that could shed light on some of America's most secretive Cold War operations. The weight of this realization prompted Sarah to call the one person whose advice she trusted most in complex situations. Maria Santos answered after 2 rings, her voice carrying the warm concern of someone who had watched her friend struggle through countless challenges over the years. "How's your first full day as a ranch owner?" Maria asked, expecting typical updates about property conditions and repair needs. Sarah's response revealed the extraordinary direction her simple property purchase had taken. "Maria, I think I've accidentally bought a piece of Cold War history. Federal agents have been here, twice offering to buy me out for amounts that don't make sense unless there's something incredibly valuable hidden here." The silence that followed reflected Maria's struggle to process information that seemed beyond the realm of normal experience. "Sarah, are you saying the government is trying to buy your ranch? Why would they care about that abandoned place?" Sarah explained the day's discoveries and confrontations, watching Maria's expression shift from skepticism to amazement as the full scope of the situation became clear. Her friend's practical nature immediately focused on the most important implications. $50,000 would change everything for you and Emma, Maria observed. You could pay off your debts, get a reliable car, maybe even start college. Savings. Why wouldn't you take that offer immediately? The question forced Sarah to articulate feelings she was still processing herself. "Because something tells me what's down there might be worth more than money. These agents are scared about what I might find, which means it's probably something the American people have a right to know about." Maria's expression revealed the concern of a friend watching someone she cared about take dangerous risks. "Sarah, these are federal agents talking about national security. Maybe some secrets are supposed to stay buried. Maybe you should take the money and focus on building a safe life for Emma." The advice reflected Maria's protective instincts, but Sarah found herself driven by principles that transcended financial considerations. "My grandfather spent his career working on classified projects that he could never discuss. He always said the hardest part wasn't keeping secrets, but wondering whether those secrets served the country or just protected powerful people from accountability." And the conversation continued as Sarah drove back towards Sage Valley to pick up Emma from after-school care, their discussion touching on questions of civic responsibility, personal safety, and the complex moral calculations involved when ordinary citizens encounter extraordinary circumstances. Emma's excitement about their ranch purchase provided an emotional anchor that reminded Sarah why financial security mattered more than abstract principles about historical transparency. Her daughter's innocent enthusiasm for their new adventure highlighted the stakes involved in whatever decision Sarah ultimately made about the government's offers. That evening, after Emma had fallen asleep dreaming about horses and wide-open spaces, Sarah began researching everything she could find about Operation Deep Freeze and Project Mountain Echo. The internet provided fragments of information about Cold War defense initiatives, but official sources remained heavily redacted or completely classified. However, academic papers and declassified documents from related projects painted a disturbing picture of covert operations that had pushed ethical and legal boundaries in the name of national security. References to psychological warfare experiments, unauthorized surveillance programs, and illegal testing on civilian populations suggested that some Cold War secrets might indeed deserve public scrutiny rather than permanent concealment. Sarah's research revealed that similar installations throughout Nevada had been connected to operations that later prompted congressional investigations and official apologies for government misconduct. The pattern suggested that whatever lay beneath her ranch might represent more than just historical curiosity. It could contain evidence of activities that violated constitutional rights and international law. The moral weight of this possibility kept Sarah awake long past midnight, wrestling with questions that seemed to have no clear answers. Did she have the right to potentially expose classified information that might embarrass the government but serve the public interest? Could she justify risking her family's security for principles that might ultimately prove irrelevant to anyone except historians and conspiracy theorists? The next morning brought unexpected developments that would reshape Sarah's understanding of her situation and the forces arrayed around her discovery. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a historian specializing in Cold War intelligence operations at the University of Nevada, called Sarah's cell phone with information that would prove crucial to the decisions ahead. Ms. Williams, I understand you've discovered installations connected to Operation Deep Freeze, Dr. Vasquez began, her voice carrying academic excitement tempered by obvious caution. I've been researching those projects for my dissertation, and I believe you may have found something historically significant. Sarah's surprise at this unexpected contact prompted immediate questions about how academic researchers had learned about her discovery. How did you hear about this? I haven't discussed the details with anyone outside my immediate circle. Dr. Vasquez's explanation revealed networks of information that extended beyond Sarah's awareness. The Cold War research community is small, and certain government document requests trigger informal communications among scholars studying similar topics. When federal agents start making urgent inquiries about historically significant locations, word spreads quickly. The revelation that Sarah's situation had attracted academic attention added new dimensions to her decision-making process. The involvement of researchers suggested that whatever lay beneath her ranch might indeed possess historical value that transcended security classifications. What can you tell me about Operation Deep Freeze? Sarah asked, recognizing that independent expertise might help her understand what she had stumbled onto. Dr. Vasquez's response provided context that government agents had conspicuously avoided. Based on declassified fragments, Deep Freeze involved experimental communication technologies and data storage systems designed to survive nuclear attacks. The installations were essentially underground archives containing backup copies of critical intelligence data and operational records. The description aligned perfectly with the sophisticated installations Sarah had discovered, confirming her suspicion that the sealed facilities contained more than abandoned equipment. And Project Mountain Echo? That's where things get controversial, Dr. Vasquez continued. Mountain Echo appears to have involved domestic surveillance operations that violated legal restrictions on intelligence gathering within American borders. The project was hastily terminated in the late 1970s following congressional investigations into intelligence agency overreach. This information transformed Sarah's understanding of her discovery from historical curiosity to potential evidence. of government misconduct that might still be relevant to contemporary debates about surveillance and civil liberties. The materials beneath her ranch could represent more than Cold War artifacts. They might contain documentation of illegal activities that deserved public scrutiny. The academic perspective provided by Dr. Vasquez offered Sarah a framework for understanding her situation that extended beyond the financial and security considerations emphasized by federal agents. The historian's research suggested that public access to these materials might serve legitimate educational and oversight purposes that justified the risks involved in resisting government pressure. However, Sarah's conversation with Dr. Vasquez also revealed the complexity of forces that would align against any attempt to expose classified materials, regardless of their historical significance or evidence of misconduct. The academic's careful phrasing and obvious concern about surveillance highlighted the personal and professional risks faced by anyone who challenged government secrecy, even in pursuit of legitimate research objectives. As Sarah processed this new information, her phone rang with yet another call from Agent Foster, whose tone had shifted towards something approaching desperation since the previous day's standoff. "Ms. Williams, I hope you've had time to consider our offer. Certain developments have made it even more important that we resolve this situation quickly and quietly." Sarah's response reflected her growing understanding of the leverage her position provided. "What kind of developments, Agent Foster? Has something changed since yesterday's negotiations?" Foster's hesitation revealed information he couldn't share, while confirming Sarah's suspicion that her situation was creating complications beyond routine security concerns. "Let's just say that extended public attention to this matter could create problems for everyone involved, including you and your daughter." The veiled threat prompted Sarah to end the conversation more abruptly than politeness would normally dictate. But she was learning that normal social conventions didn't apply when dealing with federal agents operating under pressure from their superiors. That afternoon brought the most significant development yet in Sarah's rapidly evolving situation. Sheriff Kate Morrison, the elected law enforcement official for Sage Valley County, arrived at Sarah's temporary residence with information that would fundamentally alter the balance of power in her confrontation with federal authorities. Sheriff Kate Morrison's weathered pickup truck kicked up dust clouds as it approached Sarah's temporary camping setup at the ranch. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Nevada landscape, and something in the sheriff's posture as she emerged from her vehicle suggested this wasn't a routine visit. At 55, Morrison carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent 3 decades maintaining order in a county where federal agents rarely ventured, and when they did, it usually meant trouble for local residents. "Sarah Williams," Morrison called out, her voice carrying the no-nonsense tone that had earned respect throughout Sage Valley County. "We need to talk about what's been happening on your property, and more importantly, what certain government folks have been telling you about your rights as a landowner." Sarah approached cautiously, uncertain whether the sheriff's visit represented additional pressure or potential support. "Sheriff Morrison, I assume you're here about the federal agents who've been pressuring me to sell the ranch." Morrison's expression revealed a mixture of concern and barely contained anger that surprised Sarah. "I'm here because those agents have been asking questions around town that suggest they're building some kind of case against you. Questions about your background, your finances, your associates, the kind of questions that usually precede federal charges." The revelation sent a chill through Sarah that had nothing to do with the desert evening air. "What kind of charges? I haven't done anything illegal. I purchased this property through a legitimate foreclosure auction." "That may be true," Morrison replied, "but federal prosecutors have ways of finding violations when they want them badly. Enough environmental violations, safety violations, interference with government operations. The list of potential charges is endless when they decide you're a problem that needs solving. The sheriff's warning highlighted vulnerabilities Sarah hadn't fully considered in her focus on the historical and financial aspects of her discovery. The government's inability to force cooperation through negotiation could easily shift toward criminal prosecution that would destroy her life regardless of the ultimate outcome. However, Morrison continued, her tone shifting toward something more optimistic, there are things those federal agents probably haven't told you about local jurisdiction and property rights. Things that might level the playing field considerably. Sarah felt a spark of hope amid the growing complexity of her situation. What kind of things? Morrison's smile carried the satisfaction of someone who had spent decades defending local residents against federal overreach. For starters, they can't conduct searches or seizures on your property without warrants based on probable cause of criminal activity. All their visits so far have been voluntary contacts that you could have terminated at any time. The information reframed Sarah's understanding of every interaction with federal agents, revealing that their apparent authority had relied more on intimidation than actual legal power. You're saying I could have simply refused to speak with them? Absolutely, Morrison confirmed. More importantly, any evidence they've gathered through these voluntary contacts becomes inadmissible in criminal proceedings if they obtained it through coercion or misrepresentation of their authority. The sheriff's legal analysis provided Sarah with crucial knowledge about her rights, but it also revealed how sophisticated the government's pressure campaign had been. The agents had carefully avoided crossing legal lines while creating the impression that cooperation was mandatory rather than voluntary. There's something else, Morrison continued. I've been sheriff here for 15 years, and I remember when those federal installations were active in the 1960s and early 1970s. The local impacts weren't all classified, and some of what happened back then might be relevant to your current situation. Sarah's interest sharpened as Morrison's account promised first-hand knowledge that could fill gaps in her understanding of the ranch's history. What kind of local impacts? Morrison's expression grew serious as she recalled events from decades past. Strange illnesses among ranch families near the installation sites, livestock deaths that veterinarians couldn't explain, water contamination that the government blamed on natural mineral deposits, the kind of problems that made people ask questions they weren't supposed to ask. The description painted a disturbing picture of environmental and health consequences that had been concealed or ignored during the installation's operational period. Did anyone ever investigate these problems officially? Several ranchers tried to file complaints with state agencies, Morrison replied, but federal authorities classified everything as national security matters that couldn't be discussed publicly. Families were relocated, properties were purchased by shell companies, and within a few years, most of the witnesses had been scattered across different states. The systematic suppression of local concerns suggested a pattern of cover-up that extended far beyond routine security classifications. If similar evidence remained in the sealed installations beneath Sarah's ranch, it could represent more than historical documentation. It might contain proof of government negligence or misconduct that affected innocent civilians. Sheriff Morrison, Sarah asked carefully, are you suggesting that what's buried under my property might include evidence of government wrongdoing that harmed local residents? Morrison's response carried the weight of someone who had watched injustices go unaddressed for too long. I'm suggesting that truth has a way of surfacing eventually, and sometimes it takes someone with the courage to ask difficult questions. Someone who can't be intimidated or bought off because they understand that some things matter more than personal convenience. The sheriff's words resonated with values Sarah had learned from her grandfather and tried to instill in Emma, that Integrity sometimes required standing up to powerful forces, even when the personal cost seemed overwhelming. Morrison's support provided both practical assistance and moral validation for Sarah's growing determination to uncover the truth about her property. "What would you recommend as my next step?" Sarah asked, recognizing that local law enforcement backing could provide crucial protection against federal pressure tactics. Morrison's reply revealed careful thought about strategy and timing. Document everything. Every contact with federal agents, every offer they make, every threat they imply. Build a record that demonstrates any pattern of coercion or misrepresentation of authority. The advice aligned with Sarah's criminal justice training while highlighting the importance of creating evidence that could protect her in future legal proceedings. And regarding access to the installations themselves, "That's where things get interesting," Morrison said with a slight smile. "Federal agents keep talking about national security and classified materials, but they haven't produced any court orders restricting your access to your own property. Until they do, you have the same rights as any other landowner." The observation revealed a crucial gap in the government's strategy. Despite all their warnings about security violations and criminal penalties, the federal agents had relied entirely on voluntary cooperation rather than legal enforcement mechanisms that would require judicial oversight. "Of course," Morrison continued, "if you were to access those installations, you'd want to be very careful about documenting everything properly. Video evidence, photographs, careful handling of any materials you might find. The kind of documentation that would stand up in court if anyone ever questioned your actions." The sheriff's guidance provided a roadmap for exploration that balanced Sarah's desire for truth with the legal protections necessary to defend against potential retaliation. Morrison's experience with federal overreach had taught her how to navigate the complex intersection of local rights and national security claims. As their conversation concluded, Morrison offered one final piece of advice that would prove crucial in the days ahead. "Sarah, you're not in this alone. There are people in this community who remember what happened during those Cold War years, and they're ready to support someone brave enough to seek answers. Don't let federal agents convince you that you're isolated and powerless." The sheriff's words provided emotional strength that complemented the practical guidance she had offered. Sarah realized that her situation represented more than an individual confrontation with government authority. It had become a symbol of citizens' rights to truth and accountability in a democracy that supposedly belonged to the people. That evening, Sarah made a decision that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of her conflict with federal authorities. Rather than waiting for the government to escalate their pressure tactics, she would take proactive steps to document whatever lay hidden beneath her ranch. The sealed installations had waited decades for someone with the courage to expose their secrets. She wouldn't let intimidation prevent her from fulfilling that responsibility. Sarah's first call was to Dr. Elena Vasquez, the historian whose research had provided crucial context about Operation Deep Freeze and Project Mountain Echo. "Dr. Vasquez, I've decided to access the sealed installations. Would you be willing to serve as an independent academic observer to document whatever we might find?" The historian's response revealed both excitement and concern about the proposed exploration. "Sarah, I'm absolutely interested from a research perspective, but we need to be extremely careful about legal protocols. Any evidence we gather needs to be obtained and documented in ways that would stand up to legal challenge." Sarah's criminal justice background had prepared her to understand the importance of proper evidence handling, and Sheriff Morrison's guidance had reinforced these concerns. "What specific protocols would you recommend?" Dr. Vasquez outlined procedures drawn from archaeological methodology and legal evidence standards. Multiple cameras recording continuously, careful cataloging of every item discovered, minimal disturbance of materials in their original positions, and immediate notification of relevant authorities about significant findings. Most importantly, the historian emphasized, we need witnesses whose credibility couldn't be questioned, people with professional reputations and no personal interest in the outcome. The requirement for credible witnesses led Sarah to contact Mason Torres, a respected investigative journalist whose reporting on government accountability issues had earned national recognition. Torres's initial skepticism dissolved as Sarah described her discovery and the federal response it had triggered. If even half of what you're telling me is accurate, Torres said, this could be one of the most significant Cold War document discoveries in decades. When do you plan to access the installations? Sarah's response reflected the urgency created by escalating federal pressure. Tomorrow morning. The government's increasing desperation suggests they're preparing some kind of action to prevent access. If we're going to document what's down there, it needs to happen before they can obtain court orders or fabricate security justifications. The timeline compressed all preparation into a single evening of intense planning. Sarah coordinated with Dr. Vasquez about documentation procedures, briefed Torres on the historical context, and arranged for additional equipment that would be necessary for safely exploring underground installations that had been sealed for decades. Her final call was to Maria Santos, whose friendship had provided emotional anchor throughout Sarah's greatest challenges. Maria, tomorrow, I'm going to find out what the government has been so desperate to keep hidden. If something happens to me, I need you to make sure Emma knows I was trying to do the right thing. Maria's response carried the fierce loyalty that had sustained their friendship through countless difficulties. Sarah, nothing's going to happen to you because you're not doing this alone. I'm taking the day off from the diner to be there as your witness and support. The unexpected offer of solidarity from someone whose practical nature had initially questioned Sarah's decisions provided emotional strength that transcended the fear and uncertainty surrounding the next day's exploration. Maria's presence would ensure that whatever they discovered, Emma would always know her mother had acted with courage and integrity. Dawn broke clear and cold across the Nevada desert as Sarah's small team assembled at the ranch for what would become one of the most significant document discoveries in modern American history. Dr. Vasquez arrived with professional documentation equipment, Torres brought broadcast quality cameras and recording devices, and Maria provided the moral support that reminded everyone why truth mattered more than personal safety. Sheriff Morrison appeared unexpectedly as the team prepared for descent into the sealed installations, her presence providing official law enforcement oversight that would prove crucial for the legal validity of whatever evidence they might gather. I'm here in my capacity as elected sheriff to ensure that all exploration activities comply with local laws and proper evidence procedures, Morrison announced. Her formal statement clearly intended for the recording devices that documented every aspect of the operation. The preparations took nearly 2 hours as the team assembled proper safety equipment, tested communication devices, and reviewed protocols for handling potentially hazardous materials. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she used industrial cutting tools to breach the sealed access hatch, knowing that each spark from the cutting torch brought them closer to revelations that could reshape understanding of American Cold War operations. The heavy metal door finally yielded to their efforts, revealing a vertical shaft that descended into darkness below. Emergency lighting systems, apparently designed to function independently for decades, flickered to life as the team's presence triggered motion sensors that had waited 40 years for activation. Sarah descended first, her headlamp illuminating concrete walls lined with pipes and cables that suggested sophisticated infrastructure extending far beyond simple storage facilities. The air carried a metallic taste that spoke of decades of isolation, but atmospheric testing revealed no immediate hazards that would prevent exploration. The underground complex exceeded everyone's expectations in both scope and preservation. Climate control systems had maintained stable temperature and humidity levels that preserved documents and equipment in remarkable condition. Multiple chambers branched off from the central corridor, each containing different categories of materials that painted an increasingly detailed picture of Cold War intelligence operations. The first major discovery came in what appeared to be a communications center containing banks of equipment designed for intercepting and analyzing electronic transmissions. Dr. Vasquez immediately recognized the historical significance of finding intact Cold War surveillance technology that had previously existed only in classified technical manuals. This represents a complete NSA listening post from the 1960s, she explained for the recording devices. The equipment here could have monitored communications across multiple time zones simultaneously. However, the technology paled in comparison to the documentary evidence they discovered in adjacent storage chambers. Filing cabinets contained thousands of pages of reports, transcripts, and operational summaries that detailed surveillance activities extending far beyond foreign intelligence gathering. Torres's journalistic experience helped him recognize the most significant materials, documented evidence of illegal domestic surveillance operations targeting American citizens, including anti-war activists, civil rights leaders, and political dissidents who posed no legitimate national security threat. These documents show systematic violations of constitutional rights, he said, his voice carrying amazement at the scope of misconduct they were uncovering. We're looking at evidence of crimes against American citizens that were covered up for decades. The discovery transformed their exploration from historical research into documentation of potential war crimes and constitutional violations that might still be relevant to contemporary legal proceedings. Each file cabinet revealed additional evidence of government activities that had violated both domestic law and international human rights standards. Sarah found herself overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were discovering. The installations beneath her ranch contained not just Cold War artifacts, but proof of systematic government misconduct that had affected thousands of innocent Americans. The weight of responsibility for exposing these secrets felt almost crushing. Sarah, Dr. Vasquez said softly, recognizing the emotional impact of their discoveries. You've uncovered evidence that historians and civil rights advocates have been seeking for decades. These documents could provide closure for families who never understood why their loved ones were targeted by their own government. The historian's words reminded Sarah that her courage to seek truth served purposes far beyond personal curiosity or financial gain. The materials they were documenting represented validation for victims of government overreach and potential accountability for those who had authorized illegal activities. As their exploration continued deeper into the installation complex, they discovered evidence that Operation Deep Freeze and Project Mountain Echo had been hastily terminated, not because of budget constraints or strategic changes, but because congressional investigations had threatened to expose the full scope of domestic surveillance operations. The abandonment had been so rapid that sensitive materials had been sealed in place rather than properly destroyed, creating an underground archive of government misconduct that had waited decades for discovery by someone with the courage to expose it. The question now, Torres observed as they documented the final chambers of evidence, is what happens when we emerge from here with proof that will embarrass powerful people and potentially trigger criminal investigations of activities that officially never happened. His words reminded everyone that their discovery created as many dangers as opportunities. The evidence they had gathered could serve justice and historical truth, but it would also threaten individuals and institutions with enough power to destroy anyone who challenged their secrets. As they prepared to return to the surface with documentation that would change everything, Sarah realized that her simple desire to provide a better life for Emma had evolved into something far more significant: a chance to serve truth and justice in ways that would honor her grandfather's legacy while building a better world for her daughter's future. The ascent from the underground installations felt like emerging from one world into another, carrying secrets that would soon reshape the balance of power between a determined single mother and the federal government that had underestimated her courage, her principles, and her refusal to be intimidated by forces that had silenced others for far too long. The sunlight felt almost blinding as Sarah's team emerged from the underground installations, carrying digital storage devices and documented evidence that would soon trigger the largest government accountability crisis in decades. What they had discovered beneath the Nevada desert exceeded their most ambitious expectations. Thousands of pages documenting systematic constitutional violations, illegal surveillance operations, and cover-ups that had protected powerful figures. For nearly half a century, Sheriff Morrison waited at the surface with news that would fundamentally alter the stakes of their discovery. While you were underground, federal agents surrounded the property perimeter. They're claiming emergency authority to prevent the removal of classified materials, but they haven't produced any valid warrants or court orders. The government's escalation from negotiation to potential confrontation revealed the explosive significance of whatever Sarah's team had uncovered. Dr. Vasquez immediately recognized the historical parallel to other moments when citizen courage had exposed government misconduct despite official pressure to maintain secrecy. "This is exactly how the Pentagon Papers started," she observed, referencing the famous disclosure of classified documents that had revealed government deception about Vietnam War policies. Citizens discovering truth that powerful people wanted to keep hidden, then facing the full weight of federal pressure to suppress that truth. Torres began uploading their documentation to secure cloud servers while simultaneously transmitting copies to editorial contacts at major news organizations. His journalistic experience had taught him that government pressure intensified rapidly once officials realized their secrets were escaping containment. "We have maybe hours before they find legal justification to seize everything," he warned. "The key is getting this evidence into enough hands that suppression becomes impossible." Sarah watched federal vehicles positioning themselves along access roads with growing understanding that her simple property purchase had evolved into a confrontation between citizen rights and government secrecy that would define her family's future. The choice was no longer about accepting buyout offers or maintaining property ownership. It was about whether ordinary Americans could challenge institutional power when it violated constitutional principles. Maria Santos, whose practical nature had initially questioned Sarah's decisions, now stood beside her friend with fierce determination that reflected the moral clarity of their discovery. "Sarah, my grandparents fled a country where governments could silence anyone who asked uncomfortable questions. They came to America because they believed this was different. What you're doing proves they were right to believe in this country's promise." The emotional support provided strength that transcended fear of government retaliation. Sarah realized that her courage to seek truth represented something larger than individual defiance. It embodied the democratic principles that distinguished America from authoritarian systems where citizens couldn't challenge official misconduct. Agent Mitchell's voice crackled over a loudspeaker from one of the federal vehicles. "Ms. Williams, you and your associates are in possession of classified materials that pose serious national security risks. We're authorized to prevent their removal from this location pending proper security review." Sheriff Morrison's response demonstrated the constitutional authority that protected citizens from federal overreach. Agent Mitchell, this is county jurisdiction, and you have no legal authority to detain citizens or seize property without valid warrants. Any attempt to prevent these people from leaving will be treated as unlawful imprisonment. The standoff between local and federal authority created a constitutional crisis in miniature, with Sarah's discovery serving as the catalyst for broader questions about government accountability and citizen rights. The documents they had found provided evidence that similar confrontations had occurred throughout American history, with varying outcomes depending on whether citizens possessed the courage to resist official pressure. Dr. Vasquez approached Sarah with urgent recognition of the moment's historical significance. Sarah, what happens in the next few hours will determine whether this evidence serves the public interest or disappears into classified archives forever. You have the power to choose transparency over secrecy, accountability over cover-up. The historian's words crystallize Sarah's understanding of her responsibility to future generations. The evidence beneath her ranch represented more than historical curiosity. It was proof that democracy required constant vigilance from ordinary citizens willing to challenge institutional power when it exceeded constitutional boundaries. Sarah's response would be remembered as one of the defining moments in modern government accountability. Agent Mitchell, these documents belong to the American people, not to government officials who violated their constitutional rights. I'm not just exercising my property rights, I'm fulfilling my civic duty to expose misconduct that was hidden from public oversight. Her declaration triggered immediate federal response. Additional vehicles arrived carrying personnel, who began establishing what appeared to be a perimeter designed to prevent anyone from leaving the property. The escalation revealed government desperation that confirmed the explosive nature of Sarah's discovery. However, Torres's preparation had anticipated this scenario. While federal agents focused on preventing physical removal of evidence, digital copies were already spreading through networks designed to resist government suppression. Major news organizations received preliminary documentation. Congressional oversight committees were notified of potential constitutional violations, and civil rights organizations gained access to evidence they had sought for decades. It's too late for containment, Torres announced, showing Sarah his phone displaying news alerts about the Nevada document discovery. This story is breaking simultaneously across multiple platforms. The evidence is now in the public domain. The journalist's foresight had prevented the kind of suppression that had buried previous exposures of government misconduct. By ensuring widespread distribution before federal pressure could intensify, Sarah's team had created irreversible momentum toward public accountability. Agent Mitchell's response revealed the government's recognition that their containment strategy had failed. Ms. Williams, you've compromised ongoing national security operations and potentially endangered intelligence assets worldwide. The consequences of your actions extend far beyond this property dispute. Sarah's reply demonstrated the moral evolution that had transformed her from desperate single mother to champion of democratic principles. Agent Mitchell, the real threat to national security comes from government officials who violate constitutional rights and then hide behind classification to avoid accountability. The American people have a right to know when their government betrays the principles it's supposed to protect. The confrontation between Sarah and federal authority was being broadcast live through Torres's media connections, creating real-time documentation of government pressure tactics that had previously operated in secrecy. Public awareness of the standoff provided protection that isolated citizens typically lacked when confronting institutional power. Dr. Vasquez began providing historical context for television audiences, explaining how the discovered documents revealed patterns of misconduct that connected to contemporary debates about surveillance, civil liberties, and government transparency. Her academic credibility helped frame Sarah's discovery as legitimate historical research rather than simple law-breaking. What Sarah Williams has uncovered represents the missing pieces of American Cold War history, Vasquez explained to national audiences. These documents provide evidence of government activities that violated both constitutional law and basic human rights, activities that were covered up for decades through classification and secrecy. The historian's analysis helped viewers understand that Sarah's courage served educational and democratic purposes that transcended personal gain or sensationalism. The evidence from the underground installations offered opportunities for national healing through acknowledgement of past mistakes and commitment to preventing future violations. Sheriff Morrison's role became increasingly crucial as federal pressure intensified. Her authority as elected local law enforcement provided legal protection that prevented agents from simply seizing the evidence and arresting everyone involved. The constitutional system of divided authority was protecting citizens exactly as the founders had intended. This situation demonstrates why local law enforcement independence matters, Morrison explained to reporters who had arrived to cover the developing story. When federal agencies exceed their constitutional authority, elected sheriffs have the duty to protect citizens' rights regardless of political pressure. The sheriff's stance inspired support from constitutional advocates nationwide who recognized the broader implications of Sarah's confrontation with federal authority. Social media campaigns emerged advocating for government transparency and citizen rights, with Sarah's story serving as a symbol of ordinary Americans' power to challenge institutional misconduct. As afternoon turned toward evening, Sarah received unexpected support from a source that would prove decisive in resolving the standoff. Congressman James Rodriguez, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, arrived with legal authority that superseded federal agents' claims about national security. Ms. Williams, Rodriguez announced, Congress has constitutional oversight responsibility for intelligence activities, including historical operations that may have violated law or policy. These documents fall under legislative rather than executive authority for security classification. The congressman's intervention demonstrated how constitutional separation of powers could protect citizens when executive agencies exceeded their authority. Rodriguez's presence meant that evidence from Sarah's discovery would receive congressional review regardless of Justice Department or Pentagon preferences for continued secrecy. Agent Mitchell's final attempt to maintain control revealed the desperation of officials whose careers depended on keeping their secrets buried. Congressman Rodriguez, these materials could compromise sources and methods that remain relevant to current operations. Public disclosure could endanger lives and damage relationships with allied intelligence services. Rodriguez's response reflected the constitutional authority that belonged to elected representatives rather than appointed bureaucrats. Agent Mitchell, that determination belongs to Congress after proper review, not to executive agencies that have demonstrated their willingness to exceed legal authority. These citizens have performed a public service by exposing evidence of potential constitutional violations. The congressman's support provided legal protection that allowed Sarah's team to leave the property with their evidence intact. More importantly, it established congressional jurisdiction that would ensure proper oversight of whatever additional secrets the installation complex contained. As federal vehicles finally departed in defeat, Sarah stood on her property, watching the sunset paint the Nevada mountains in shades of gold and purple. The landscape that had seemed like merely a chance for fresh start had become the site of one of the most significant government accountability victories in modern American history. Emma's voice over the phone bubbled with excitement about news. Reports featuring her mother as a hero who had challenged powerful people to protect democracy. "Mom, everyone at school is saying you're famous for fighting the government and winning." Sarah's response reflected the values she hoped to pass to her daughter. "Emma, I'm not famous for fighting anybody. I'm just someone who found evidence that powerful people had hurt innocent families, and I decided that truth was more important than being comfortable or safe." The conversation reminded Sarah that her courage would inspire Emma's generation to believe in their own power to challenge injustice when they encountered it. The example of ordinary citizens standing up to institutional pressure created hope for continued democratic vitality. Dr. Vasquez arrived that evening with preliminary analysis of the documents that revealed their full historical significance. "Sarah, what you've uncovered will require years of scholarly research to fully understand, but the initial evidence suggests systematic violations affecting thousands of American families during the Cold War era." The historian's assessment confirmed that Sarah's discovery would provide closure for victims who had never understood why their loved ones had been targeted by government surveillance. Families who had spent decades wondering whether their relatives had been criminals or traitors would finally learn that they had been innocent victims of illegal government operations. Torres reported that major news organizations were preparing comprehensive exposés based on the evidence, with congressional hearings scheduled to begin within weeks. "This story will dominate news cycles for months, Sarah. You've triggered accountability processes that will reshape how Americans think about government secrecy and citizen rights." The journalist's prediction proved accurate, as Sarah's discovery catalyzed national conversation about surveillance, constitutional limits, and democratic transparency. Her courage to seek truth despite government pressure became a touchstone for broader movements advocating for accountability and reform. 6 months after Sarah's discovery, the Clearwater Ranch had been transformed from abandoned failure into a symbol of democratic renewal. The installation complex became a museum dedicated to government accountability, with Sarah serving as director of educational programs that taught visitors about the importance of citizen vigilance in protecting constitutional rights. The financial settlement from congressional appropriations had provided Sarah and Emma with security that transcended their wildest hopes. But more importantly, it had been structured to fund educational programs that would inspire future generations to understand their civic responsibilities. The money mattered less than the legacy of courage and principle that would outlive any individual benefit. Emma thrived in the wide-open spaces of their Nevada ranch, but she also absorbed lessons about standing up for truth that would shape her character for life. Her mother's example demonstrated that ordinary people possessed power to challenge injustice when they found the courage to act on their principles. "Mom," Emma asked one evening, as they watched stars emerge over the desert landscape, "are you glad you didn't just take the government's money and stay quiet?" Sarah's response captured the transformation that had occurred through her journey from desperate single mother to national symbol of democratic courage. "Emma, some opportunities only come once in a lifetime. I had the chance to serve truth and justice instead of just serving myself. That chance was worth more than any amount of money they could have offered." The conversation beneath Nevada stars represented the completion of Sarah's evolution, from someone seeking personal security to someone who had found purpose in serving principles larger than individual comfort. Her discovery had created national impact, but it had also created personal fulfillment that came from knowing she had chosen courage over convenience when it mattered most. The underground installations that had once hidden government secrets now hosted school groups learning about constitutional rights and civic responsibility. Sarah's story was incorporated into curricula teaching students that democracy required active participation from ordinary citizens willing to challenge power when it exceeded proper boundaries. The greatest threat to democracy, Sarah often told visiting students, isn't foreign enemies or economic problems. It's the belief that ordinary citizens can't make a difference when they see something wrong. Every person in this room has the power to change history if they find the courage to act on their principles. The lessons Sarah taught honored her grandfather's memory while preparing new generations to understand their responsibilities as democratic citizens. The courage she had demonstrated in challenging government secrecy became inspiration for countless others facing their own moments of choice between convenience and conscience. As sunset painted the mountains surrounding her ranch, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from desperate waitress to national symbol of government accountability. The path hadn't been easy, but it had led to discoveries and transformations that would benefit her daughter's generation and beyond. The documents beneath her property had revealed government misconduct from the past, but more importantly, Sarah's courage in exposing them had strengthened democratic institutions for the future. Her example proved that ordinary citizens possessed extraordinary power when they chose principle over personal comfort, truth over convenience, and courage over fear. The Nevada desert that had once hidden Cold War secrets now hosted celebrations of transparency and accountability. Sarah Williams, the single mother who had purchased a failed ranch for $3,000, had discovered that the greatest treasures weren't buried underground. They were the principles of justice and democracy that lived in the hearts of citizens brave enough to defend them when they were threatened by those who preferred darkness to light. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.